second. Okay, and we are live. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, and we are happy to host both Barry Stewart Hunter and William Jackson for this evening, Fear and Loathing in London, New Writing from British Gay Authors. And we're also joined by Martin Farrell, who is the publisher of these two books. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, if you are watching this live as opposed to a recording. And just I'll say a couple of words about the Bureau before we begin. So the Bureau of General Services Queer Division is a queer bookstore located inside Manhattan's LGBT Community Center on West 13th Street. So my partner Donnie Jochum and I founded the Bureau in 2012, and we've been located at the center, the LGBT Community Center in Manhattan, since 2014. And we're an all-volunteer, independent queer bookstore. The short explanation for our very lengthy name is that we're a government agency for a government that does not yet exist, which is to say that this is, surprise, surprise, a utopian project. We hold a space for queer culture and queer books. And that's our main mission, is just to serve the queer community of New York and all the visitors we have from around the world. So we started doing lots of virtual events during the pandemic, and I'm happy that we still have that opportunity now. It's really increased our outreach and made it possible for us to connect with people all over the world. Last week, we did an event with someone reading from Brazil. So it's really lovely to be able to press a couple of buttons and have people joined in the same space, at least virtually. So I want to turn it over, and I'm going to put some links in the chat so you can see our store and find out more about the store, as well as William's and Barry's books, where you can purchase those online. But I'm going to turn it over right now to Martin Farrell, who will say a few words about the press. Martin.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. We are really delighted to be here at the Bureau, if only virtually, but it's an absolute privilege. We love what you're doing and what you stand for. Our press is called Martin Farrell Company, so it's eponymous. You know, I am Martin Farrell. We're really interested in publishing a wonderful selection of very specialist titles. So we have a strong interest in LGBT plus and queer, but also feminist publishing. We also publish political pamphlets, some from the past and some, you know, kind of contemporary writers thinking about how to make the world kinder and more humane. We say that our mission is to publish books which shed some light on the very difficult and complex business of living a good life as a human being. So that's our sort of guiding light. We're absolutely delighted to be the publishers of Barry Stewart Hunter and William Jackson. We are very, very, very proud of a uniform edition of Barry's works. So we have published 5 different titles in a beautiful uniform edition of Barry's work, including his first novel, Aden, which is about the former British protectorate, which is also where Barry was born, but it's a work of fiction about the territory of Aden. And we're also very pleased to publish William Jackson in what is the beginning of an LGBT plus horror strand. We spend a lot of time, I personally spend a lot of time engaging with our LGBT bookstore partners around the world. And the one thing that we've heard again and again is there's not enough LGBT plus horror fiction. It's often asked for and the choice isn't that great. So we've started this strand, which is how you and I met. And we're very happy to publish William's first novel, which is called Satan's Lamp, and is a gay horror story of terror beyond endurance. And that concludes my little introduction to the press.
All right. Thank you, Martin. So I'll introduce Barry, and then Barry will give us a reading, and then we'll hear from William Jackson, and then we can have a chat afterwards. So, born in Aden, Barry Stewart Hunter grew up in the Middle East and Scotland. A novelist, short story writer, and screenwriter, he lives in London. Please welcome Barry Stewart Hunter.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you, Martin and Greg. It's super to be here with you this evening, so thanks very much for having me along, for having us along. Yes, I'm going to be reading from Republic of North London. It's a collection of 3 novellas, that is to say, shorter novels. And I'm going to be reading from 2 out of the 3 novellas for you this evening. In the first story, which is called The Blood Diaries, the protagonist, Donaldson, is confronting a series of crises, professional and personal, which together threaten to bring his comfortable London world crashing down around him. In this extract, this episode, Donaldson, who is a lecturer in English with options in creative writing at a university in London, reluctantly accepts an invitation to go for a drink with his most promising student, Nathan, whom he actually suspects is having sex with his wife in this or that London hotel room. This is pretty confusing for the lecturer because at the same time, his most promising student reveals that the story he's working on in class, the piece of work that he's developing in school, which features a certain Dexter Doolittle, is actually a homage to his teacher. Okay. They are in a pub at around dusk. Correction, they are in the large annex of a public house in West Hampstead, just as the lights are coming on. This annex, which looks much like a church hall, is given over tonight, as it is every Thursday, to a popular line dancing session that is free to join. There must be 50 or 60 people, men and women of all ages and all shapes and sizes, arranged in a kind of regimental grid formation and spaced a few feet apart from wall to wall within the annex, which connects to the pub itself via a short corridor, housing the toilets. All the men in this room wear plaid or checked or tartan shirts, all that is, except one. I'm really not sure about this, Donaldson comments, glancing backwards over his shoulder. I don't think I'm quite ready for this particular cultural delight. You'll be fine, Nathan tells him from a few feet behind. Why don't you change places with me so you can at least watch what I'm doing? Relax and enjoy. Just remember, step, rock back, recover, right shift, cross, unwind, left shift, rock back, recover. Then simply repeat from the top. To repeat any program, Donaldson says, suggests having successfully completed it in the first instance. Let me repeat. I think this is a dangerous recreational mistake. Try to forget who you are for 5 goddamn minutes, Professor. That's all it takes. 5 minutes is quite a long time. Try counting it out. You like country music, don't you? So just go with it. Let me see now. Islands in the Stream, anyone? Kenny and Dolly over and over again? Islands in the Stream may well feature at some point. It often does, based on the posthumous novel by Hemingway, right? Just the title, one imagines, smart ass. Oh Lord, give me the strength to do thy work. It turns out the senior lecturer has seriously misjudged his most promising student in multiple ways. When the dancing is over, they repair to the pub in order to drink more beer. It turns out Nathan doesn't have any parents, enlightened or otherwise, with whom to make those annual road trips to Rincon or Puerto Escondido when the surf is up. The sponsored student, whose school fees are met by an obscure American foundation, has no blood brothers or sisters unless it is in a once removed kind of way. He is an orphan who has been raised by his uncle and aunt in a respectable commuter town to the south of the capital, and for a few formative years in Seattle, Washington. They never really loved me, he tells Donaldson. I mean, they have their own kids to love, but I'm not complaining. I get a check from them at Christmas, 60 quid in case you're wondering. I'm not, Donaldson says. Do you think about your parents at all these days? No, Nathan says. I never knew them, so I have nothing to go on in terms of memories. In that case, you don't have to worry about how much to love or be loved. That's a major plus, believe me. Do you have children, Don? I'm guessing you do, a boy and a girl. Time passes quickly. As the hours come and go, Donaldson is forced to accept that Nathan Ford won't be sloping off to a hotel in Tottenham Court Road anytime soon. What does it mean for the father and husband? It means his wife of 15 years is spending tonight with her artist cousin in order to help him make a will. And Donaldson doesn't quite know how he feels about that. Strange, he almost feels let down by the way things are. He had taken it for granted that his life was lurching or lurching further off the rails, but now it seems he has one less thing to worry about. Nathan gets up. He is going to the toilet and then to the bar. The jukebox is playing a honky-tonk song. When Donaldson checks his phone, he discovers a message from Tamara. She is at Jamie's place in Kilburn. That is not a surprise to Donaldson, not anymore. But what comes next is surprising. Tamara is going to be at Jamie's place for more than one night. She is going to be there, she indicates, for a little while. She has moved out of the house, taking Alice with her. Oh, and she plans to call Donaldson tomorrow to discuss this whole situation. When Nathan returns with 2 beers, Donaldson already has his jacket on. Now he zips it up. Did I say something wrong? Nathan asks, setting down the streaming bottles. Not at all, Donaldson says. I'm sorry, I have to go. I've just had a message from my wife telling me she's leaving me tonight, as in leaving me. I think I need to make a few calls. That's too bad. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh, I think it's been on the cards for quite some time. I'm just thinking about the kids, that's all. She isn't taking them with her? Looks like she's taking one of them, the younger one, leaving you to look after the older one, something along those lines. Like I say, that's too bad. I was about to invite you to come home with me tonight, but I guess that's not going to happen now. I beg your pardon. Are you propositioning me, Nathan Ford? Well, yes, I believe that's the technical term. And then Donaldson feels doubly bad about life. He is running out on something here. He can't help that. It is clear in his head. He is not running away from something or anything, but he has to leave. Look, he says, it's been great. It's been a blast, but I have to go now. I'll see you in school. I'm not going to give you a speech about professional conduct or misconduct or any of that. Let's just say you're not my type. In any case, I'm probably old enough to be your father, if you had one. Maybe that's the whole idea, Nathan says, shrugging lightly. I'm sorry, Donaldson says. That came out all wrong. Do you forgive me? Of course, you'd better run along. Oh, and Don, there's no need to worry. About what? Dexter Doolittle. I'll be sure to give him a happy ending. Outside in the street, he takes a deep breath. In fact, he takes a few deep breaths. It is raining heavily after a prolonged dry spell. Now the smell of damp dust is in the air. How Donaldson wishes he had gone to the toilet before leaving the pub, but there is no going back from here. He must go forward, whatever that takes, whatever it means. He takes out his phone and brings up his wife's number. Then he changes his mind about calling Tamara. What exactly does he have to say to her? It occurs to him she is just a modest distance away in Kilburn. Odd that they should be so close to each other at this hour. They are almost close enough for semaphore, Donaldson reasons. It is chucking it down now. People run for cover, free sheets and magazines held over their heads. Donaldson brings up Henry's mobile phone number in place of his wife's, but when he calls his son, it goes straight to voicemail. Just as the father is about to blurt out something foolish and heartfelt, I love you, for example, a white van flashes past at speed and throws a shower of muddy rainwater at him. He is without an umbrella in this part of North London. I'm going to leave that one there. Thank you very much. The second novella I'm going to read from tonight is actually the third story in this volume. It's called Under the Bridge at Midnight. It takes the Holocaust, that is to say, the systematic killing of gypsies, Jews, and queers by the Nazis in Europe during the 1940s, and transposes it to these islands, the British Isles, in other words, 100 years from today. So in other words, this is, if you will, a near future dystopia. In this extract that we're about to hear, Oscar, the main character, is at a death camp in Scotland. Oscar has been spared execution because he has been recruited as a reluctant spy by both the fascists who run the camp on the one hand, and also the rebels or the partisans who represent the resistance on the other hand. At this halfway point in the story, Oscar plus a handful of companions who have also been spared death because they have some practical skill begin to consider for the first time the idea of escape. They had been sawing and hammering since dawn, and now the thing was up. On the northern side of the central courtyard, it rose to a commanding height above the ground, high enough, that is, to ensure a good view for all. At the same time, it was sited very deliberately at the margin of the square. It made no sense to defer the processing of our daily influx on account of this new distraction. The solitary noose of a virgin material so outrageously fresh it hurt the eye descended from the gallows pole in accordance with all the relevant height and weight inputs. Now the carpentry boards stepped back to admire their work, or in the case of their anxious foreman, rehearsed the trapdoor release procedures with an understandable focus on making a success of everything. The scaffold is a primitive instrument. Nevertheless, all must be done right. For hour after hour of the night in our smoky Nissen hut, the talk had been of putative nooses plural. Our merry band was quite naturally of a single discomforting opinion. The scaffold to be had our name on it. There would be not just one hoop of rope swaying starkly in the breeze come morning, but several. We thoroughly deserved it. A tooth for a tooth. Hadn't we just killed two people more or less with our bare hands? In all this, there was little relief to be had from the mouths of the carpenters and cabinet makers themselves. They kept professionally mum about their brief for much of the night. When at last the word filtered through on the subject of a single noose or a solitary execution, it failed to dampen the unpleasant speculation, at least in my department. Quite simply, I saw my own sweet self at the bottom of that rope, clothes soiled, eyes bulging under the hood. All is vanity, right up until the end. My companions tried to lift my spirits using an unlikely short list of alternative candidates, from the partisan queen to the camp commandant himself, who might just as easily be earmarked for the drop when the new day arrived. Blue, by the way, was well out of all this dawn watch conjecture. He had slipped out of our hut as usual to keep his romantic rendezvous, this time without the prospect of a burly rival in tow. We began to gather in the courtyard immediately after 11 bells. In our group, somewhere near the middle of the assembly, I counted Blue, Daniel, Levi, Aaron, Cyclops, Benjamin, and a last-minute addition list to our number, Ruth herself. When she took up position deftly between her lover and his best friend, I picked up the message very clearly. This confident woman recognized she had come between us. It was unfortunate, she was saying, but that was the way things were. I could scarcely challenge her to a duel. In any case, she had the air of someone who could look after herself when the chips were down. A great shout went up in the square. I suppose I started in those bloodthirsty moments to let go of my friend Blue. Another shout went up. The hanging event had begun. The prisoner was escorted from the northern end of the camp by a kind of guard of honor made up of the most fanatical ultras. No need to question the commitment of these baby-faced zealots. Their pride in their work was apparent to the most casual observer. At this time, the question began to circulate in increasingly excited whispers. Would the camp commandant himself, no one seriously expected him to be the one to swing, grace the occasion with his rare presence? In fact, he was arriving now, conveyed from his summer residence in a sedan chair by 4 of his stoutest henchmen. Look, there he is. I told you he approves of a good hanging once in a while. Pour encourager les autres, I dare say. That young man is a legend in his own lifetime. I can't see him. How can you be sure it's actually him? It could be a look-alike in there, in case of attempted assassination. It's him, all right. Look out for the telltale veil covering half his face and the black glove when he waves. By now, the assembled necks were craning to get a better view of the prisoner. Everyone could see he was a man, but which man? Did anyone here represented know the poor fellow? I tell you what, I don't recognize this old codger at all. I really wouldn't know him from Adam. Where on earth did they dig this duffer up? He looks half dead already. I might have to ask for my money back at this rate. Hush your mouth and show some respect for the condemned man. Don't you know it's all in the manner of the dying? It was Samuelson. It was Samuelson up there on the platform with his hands tied behind his back. And yes, he did look a tad the worse for wear. To say I got a nasty shock would be to understate the case in a serious way. I pressed forward involuntarily. I needed to be closer to Samuelson. In many ways, he was like a father to me, or at least I had been told by his wife that he often viewed me as a son. At all events, he was my mentor, my friend, and the custodian of my precious library of history books. I felt a restraining hand on my arm. Whose hand? In fact, it was Ruth who bid me stay. What subtle emotion passed between us in that moment? Up on the stage, they were reading the citation now. This proclamation, which had much to do with treachery and double dealing, and yes, books. was read solemnly by the officer with the toothbrush moustache. They had decided that they could no longer indulge my mentor with his star status and his flagrant disregard for adversarial norms. There would be no hood for poor Samuelson. That was the real mark of his perfidy, of its extreme nature. On went the noose. There was a pause here for effect on the part of the executioner-in-chief. No one wants to blink and miss certain details. When they asked him if he had anything to say, the condemned man said he did. Under the bridge at midnight. That is what he said. It is all he said. When they saw he had nothing more cogent to add to this parting shot, they pulled the lever below deck and Samuelson went down without a hitch. There was a lot of disgruntled analysis of the hanged man's last utterance. What was he on about? Where was he coming from with his cryptic remark, so unsatisfying to an audience? This remark held real significance for me. I felt it strongly. Although he couldn't see me in the crowd, Samuelson was speaking directly to me. Again, I felt crushed by a great burden. I stood alone in the face of these few words. What were they saying? Was this an affirmation of last resort? A signal of intent, perhaps, or a call to action? What intent then, and which action? I began to feel faint. It was hot in the courtyard, and I'd had no sleep to speak of. I was in the water with Kay. I don't as a rule swim, but I was swimming now. This was at night, with the abandoned lighthouse up ahead. A swell developed for no reason. I had lost my companion. When I looked behind, I couldn't see the shore. Then Blue laid a hand on my shoulder and shook me as if to bring me to my senses, with the sun practically overhead and the hangman's rope still creaking somewhere not too far off. This place isn't really for us, Oscar, he said. Don't you think it's about time we came up with an exit strategy of our own? It is impossible to describe adequately the impact Blue's words had on me. For the first time in a long while, I felt as though I was walking towards something good, the rest of my life, say. Blue saw it right away. He looked into my eyes and he got it. I gave him my best chance then. I gave him a chance, but he didn't take it. Instead, he took a step back. That was when I told myself finally that I was in love with him and that I would always be alone from now on. There was a postscript to the hanging affair. When I turned to confront the scaffold in the almost empty square, they were loading Samuelson's body onto a cart. Walking towards me slowly in a cloud of dust with his head bowed was Benjamin. He passed by very close, as if he didn't know me or he couldn't see me. I saw him, however. He was weeping soundlessly, big tears falling from his soft whiskers towards his roped sandals. When I thought about this later, it made perfect sense. Everything made sense later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barry. And next up, we have William Jackson, a British author of gay horror fiction. He cites his influences as Richard Lehman, Dennis Wheatley, and Fred Mustard Stewart. His fiction has been described as hammer horror for the 21st century. Please give a warm visual welcome to William Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Okay, so Satan's Lamp is a gay horror novel, and it's set in 1987. And I'm going to read you two extracts tonight. And the actual action of the book, it begins in London and then moves very quickly to a lighthouse off the coast of Cornwall in southern England, out in the middle of the sea, out in the Atlantic. And in this first extract, there are three lighthouse keepers. There is the main character, who is called Jabe, and he's a young gay guy, and he's a rookie lighthouse keeper. He's almost 21 years old. And then on the lighthouse with him is an older guy in his late 30s called Alan, and Jabe has a bit of a crush on him because Alan is ruggedly handsome. And then there is another older keeper called Cyrus, and Cyrus is nicknamed Spooky by the other lighthouse keepers because he's interested in Ouija boards and alien abductions and UFO sightings and all the things that I love. And there is a fourth keeper who is missing, presumed dead, and his name is Bill Norton. And Bill Norton was swept over into the sea, and they've been unable to recover Bill Norton's body. So Bill Norton is the other keeper who is missing, presumed dead. And in this extract, Spooky has convinced Jabe and Alan to join him in a seance to see if they can contact the missing Bill Norton. And the seance takes place during one of the biggest storms that the UK, in southern England particularly, ever saw on October the 15th, 1987. So it's the middle of the night, and there is a huge storm raging around the lighthouse. And then in the middle of the seance, all of the lights go out, all of the power goes off. And because the storm shutters are closed, you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's pitch black. So we're going to join the story there. Then the lights go out. Jabe holds his fingers up in front of his face and sees nothing. What the fuck? He hears Spooky curse. Then Alan's voice. Are you okay? No. Listen, Spooky says. The generator stopped. There is only the rushing of the sea outside, only the wind, only the endless patterning and re-patterning sea. Alan's voice again. The power will be out for the whole tower. The light. Does anyone have a match? Then Spooky. In my pocket, hang on. The little flame lights the space above the table a sickly yellow. Over here, Alan beckons to Spooky. They try to switch on the battery light, but it's dead. Christ, what the hell's going on? We need to get the storm shutters open. We'll have to risk a breach. They stumble to the window and push the shutters back. Moonlight filters dimly into the room, and Jabe is able to make out the sink top, the TV set, the oven. Alan finds torches, tosses one to Spooky. The beams play across the furniture, dance over foolscap folders, VHS tapes, tins of food, and they are belongings abandoned on a sinking ship. Something bad is going down, Spooky says in a high-pitched voice. What the hell? Something really bad is going down. Shut up. Alan's voice is very loud in the tight space of the room. Then a single cacophonous bang echoes up from the base of the tower. Then it sounds again, something banging on metal. Then it sounds again. What the hell is it? Jabe whispers. Something's at the doors, Spooky croaks. Jesus Christ, the thing from the Ouija board. It's going to get in. It's going to kill us. Alan reaches him in a stride. Shut up and get a bloody grip. You're the acting PK. You can have the bloody job, Spooky says. Alan looks at Jabe. You and Cyrus go up top and check on Sea Engine, he says. Find out what the problem is. Try and get it started. I'll go down and find out what the noise is. He goes out onto the stairs. Jabe follows him. I should go with you, he says. Truth is, he feels safer with Alan. Alan calls back to Spooky impatiently. Go and check the generator. He is struggling to keep his voice even. There's no light, he says. We're showing no light. Get the generator going again. Spooky picks up his torch and heads upstairs. The storm shutters on the lower floors are braced closed. The darkness is absolute. The steps are narrower than usual. The air is thick as glue. Dead engines produce no steady rhythm to compete with the sound of the sea. Alan and Jabe open the storm shutters level by level until they reach the winch room. Jabe sees the winch as a giant red dragon. The winch chains a grotesque torture apparatus. By the base of the tower, the banging is unbelievably loud. The air is ringing with the dead clang of metal. Alan leads the way down the last few steps to the entrance to the tower. As far as he can see, the doors are secure. No water, no breach. Take the light and get behind me, Alan says. The onslaught from the outside is incessant now. Whatever's on the other side knows they are there. What do you think it is? Jabe says. It's not water, that's for sure, Alan tells him. Jabe is back in a childhood nightmare. The goblin is under the bed. The wolf man is on the landing. Branches are scratching at the window. Things are going bump in the night. Alan hits the underside of the first bracing bar, now the second, and starts to open the doors, but he is knocked to the ground by something very large. Jabe drops the torch and everything turns black. The passageway rages with unhuman staccato sounds. Jabe searches for the torch by touch, finds it. Then the beam is skittering across the stairway, catching Alan's face and his hands beating like paddles. Something is twisting on the floor. It is in the shape of a man, only different in some way. Jabe is very afraid of the thing on the floor. He is shouting, and the light from the torch is swinging around insanely. "Keep the light steady," Alan is shouting. "I'll turn him over." Alan is leaning over the struggling thing. For a second, a head appears in the torch beam, mottled and purplish. The eyes are blank. The eyelids are waxy and swollen. The thing is soaking wet and thrashing about like a suffocating eel. Now a roller is curling in through the open doors, sweeping Alan and Jabe and the struggling thing down the passage to the foot of the stairs. "Shut the doors," Alan calls out as he tries to hold on to the huge form. "It's all right. Listen to me. You're going to be all right." The writhing thing doesn't seem to hear. It seems in intolerable pain, foaming at the mouth, fitting. "I said, shut the doors." Alan's voice jolts Jabe back to reality. He reaches the storm doors as another wave curls into the tower. He is slipping and stumbling and falling against the doors and shouldering them shut and ramming the bars into position just as another wave hits. "Go ahead of me," Alan said. "Light the way." Jabe was trembling, doing his best to keep the torch steady. The light jerked and flickered over dripping pipework, storage crates, and the stairs running with water. He lost his footing, recovered his balance. Alan was close behind, half carrying, half dragging the dark thing up the stairs. It fought him all the way. Alan dropped him and struggled to get him upright again. The veins were standing out like cords on Alan's neck. "I better help you," Jabe said. "Just hold the light steady." Alan heaved the man onto the landing, struggling to catch his breath. "Christ," he said, "he weighs a ton." Then the unman broke away somehow, worming strangely across the constricted space, almost knocking Jabe back down the stairs. Alan seized hold of the massive bulk and, with one last almighty effort, hauled it into the sleeping quarters. They got it onto a bunk, but it was still moving strangely and drooling from the mouth. "We'll have to restrain it, or it'll hurt itself, or us. Get the boat rope as quickly as you can," Alan said. Spooky appeared at the door. "It's no good. Sea engine is dead." Then he saw the form on the bed. "Jesus Christ," he said. "That's Bill Norton." So that's the first extract from Satan's Lamb. And in the second extract, there are two women characters, and they are traveling down in the middle of the storm, driving through the empty countryside to try to get to the lighthouse to help the people on the lighthouse in some way. And the two characters are a young British Asian woman called Layla, and she is Jabe's best friend. And traveling with Layla is a woman in her 60s. She's a white British woman called Ruth, and she is an author who writes about the supernatural. And Ruth also has certain abilities. She has extrasensory abilities, so she can see and hear and feel things that other people can't feel. So as these two women are driving down through the dark, they have to stop for petrol. But the evil forces that are massing know that they are coming. So when they stop at the petrol station to get some petrol, there is something nasty waiting for them there. So we'll join the story at that point. The petrol station was an island of light in the whipping and reeling dark. A solitary car crawled slowly through the night. Layla killed the engine. I need to make a call, she told Ruth. My folks will be worried sick. Of course, Ruth said warmly. Do you need to call anyone? Layla asked as she fumbled in her purse for coins. Oh, no, I'm fine, my love. You run along. The whole phone box trembled violently in the wind. Layla dialed her parents' house. The line was engaged. She tried the flat. After several seconds, her flatmate, Mindy, picked up. Oh, thank God you're all right. Where on earth are you? I'm making my way down to Penzance, Layla said. What on earth are you doing down there? It's a long story. Can you try and get through to my mum and dad and just let them know I'm okay? Sure, Mindy said. They've already been on the phone. Just tell them I'm all right. What's going on? You're not running away for a dirty weekend, are you? Of course not, Layla laughed. Just tell everyone that I'm okay and I'll be in touch again soon. But the pips sounded and they were cut off. Layla hurried back to the car. Everything all right, dear? Yep, she said. Everything's fine. Let's fill up. Newspapers flip-flopped across the tarmac. The forecourt canopy creaked ominously overhead. Layla thrust the nozzle into the tank. Ruth got out of the car, clinging to the door frame to steady herself in the wind. Stay inside, Layla called above the howling. No, 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 dear, I'll go and pay. Without waiting for a response, Ruth pulled her coat tightly around her and made unsteadily for the shop. Pots of geraniums had fallen over, and their red petals put her in mind of blood amongst the shards of broken terracotta. The door jangled cheerfully as she closed it behind her against the wind. The chiller cabinets buzzed and flickered erratically. A half-eaten tuna sandwich curled on a paper plate beside the cash register. Ruth guessed the attendant must be out back. Crisp packets and toilet paper were strewn in the aisle. It looked like the aftermath of a kinky party. She rang the bell on the countertop. The fluorescent lights ticked. Tick, tick, tick. The light was underpowered, intermittent and greenish. Ruth saw Layla replacing the petrol nozzle in its holder. Layla nodded as she got back into the car, and Ruth waved in acknowledgement. She rang the bell again. Hello? Is anyone around? The fluorescent lights ticked on. Tick, tick, tick. I need to pay for some petrol. Ruth started to feel unwell. Images appeared in her mind's eye. Cannibalism in Bergen-Belsen, the Zeebrugge ferry disaster, Ian Brady, Dennis Nielsen, youth, innocence raped and murdered, the rotting stink of depravity and death. Like a rubbernecker at a motorway pileup, she felt compelled to see what was out back. Hello? She walked to the back of the shop. Tick, tick, tick. Is anyone here? She reached out for the door handle. She opened the door to a mean little staff room with threadbare sofa, portable TV, broken coffee table, a little shattered glass on the floor. She opened the door to what looked like a meat locker. Tick, tick, tick. The air inside was sickly sweet. She heard laboured breathing. Something whimpered. Hello? She walked in the direction of the whimpering. She felt afraid. Pull yourself together, old girl, she thought. She straightened her spine, making herself as tall as she could. Who's there? Are you all right? Tick, tick, tick. A man's back, a man hunched over on the floor. Can I help you, dear? The man rises on his haunches. In the half-light, Ruth sees he is slick with sweat. The skin of his neck is very swollen. There are black masses. Ruth knows these are buboes. From her history books, she knows without any doubt that this is bubonic plague. Help me, the man heaves the words from his swollen to split throat. Then he starts towards her. Ruth backs down the aisle carefully, but she still manages to catch her ankle. She snatches at shelves, boxes, cans, anything to stop herself from falling onto the concrete floor. The diseased man's breathing is quick, staccato. Greenish saliva wets his chin. He is reaching out to her with bloated and blackened fingers. As if from nowhere, Layla is behind her, preventing her fall, dragging her by the arm to the fire exit. Layla lunges at the door, but the bar does not depress and the door doesn't open, and all the while the lights are ticking, tick, tick, tick. The infected man is close now. Tick, tick, tick. He is going to speak. They're all going to die. You'll never save them, little bitch. Layla pumps the bar of the fire door, kicks at the door wildly, screams at it to open. Tick, 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 tick. And out they stumble onto the forecourt. Now the sky is full of a different sound, the wind joined by something else. Flies, Ruth mouths, flies now. Now heavenly hosts of blue bottles are stroking, touching, feeling, tasting the car. Now they are pushing their way in through the air vents. Layla thrusts the key into the ignition. The car lurches and stalls. The song of the blue bottle fills the car. Ruth tries to cover the grills with her hands, but the heavenly host are too many. Layla turns the key again. The engine kicks into life and she starts the windscreen wipers, and the blue bottles rise to avoid the blades and settle again and rise and settle. Layla drives blindly out onto the road. She tries to screen wash and looks in the rearview mirror and sees the filthy cloud filling the forecourt, but not moving out onto the road. More plagues of Egypt, she asks. Pestilence and swarms of flies, Ruth says, with more to come. And that's the end.
Thank you, William. So Barry and William, did you have questions for one another? Or could you?
I have a question, Barry. You there's a lighthouse connection, isn't there, with your novellas and the Satan's Lamp being set, the story being set mostly on a lighthouse. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there is, and it's just a coincidence. I mean, not the connection within my three stories, but the connection with your novel. When I wrote mine, I didn't know that yours was going to be set, that yours was set on a lighthouse. So it's a strange coincidence. These things happen. But no, from the point of view of my stories, I set out to make them very loosely interlinked. This was to do with some of the language, some of the phrases are repeated, so that you get a kind of echo of something. You think, oh, I've heard that somewhere before by the time you get to the third novella or whatever. But also in the imagery, some of the images are repeated as well. So there's a kind of knock-on effect, like passing a baton or whatever from story to story, if you read them in the order that they're intended to be read. So the lighthouse business was one of these visual motifs, which was all about something that exists always sort of out of sight, just out of sight, that, you know, just round the corner or whatever. In most of the stories, it crops up in all three stories, and in each case, the lighthouse is abandoned. It's just a potent image that is useful in all of the stories for actually directing the plot along, and also, as I say, for kind of linking the three stories. But it's not by any means the sort of be all and end all of the story, as it is very definitely in your novel. But yeah, interesting that there's that coincidence. I was going to ask you, the song of the blue bottle, where did this come from? I love that.
It's that sound, isn't it? That sound of flies, which is quite disturbing, I think. You know, when you see it on films, for example, you hear that buzzing everywhere. And it is kind of hypnotic, I think. So that's why I was thinking of it like a kind of a song that kind of hypnotizes you, almost like the sirens.
Yeah, it's nice. And, having grown up in the Middle East, get taught at a very early age to to deal with flies. They take off backwards, for example, we learned as kids, so that if one's on a table and you want to catch it, you have to come from behind, just above the table, and it takes off backwards into your hand. So there you go.
Well, I did not know that, Barry. There's me trying to get them with a kitchen towel and they keep getting away. I'll know now.
Exactly. Next time.
Yes.
No, but I really like the Song of the Blue Bottle. That's really nice. Yeah.
Martin, did you want to jump in at all?
I'm always interested in the form of the novella. And so I often ask Barry this question. So I'm not particularly original, but I really love the idea that the novella is not a long short story, nor is it a short novel, but it's something else. And Barry explains it really beautifully around, this volume, Republic of North London, is 3 novellas. So, you get kind of 3 beautiful moments that juxtapose together. But it'd be great if you could talk a little bit, Barry, about your feeling about the novella. I love what you talk about when you describe it.
Yeah, well, it's a short novel to be sure, but to my mind, it has it can't only be classified or categorized according to its length or its word count. It has a particular quality of its own, or ideally speaking, it has a particular quality of its own. Everybody agrees on this, but nobody can quite agree what it actually means. So where to start really with it? I mean, it's about length and heft, of course it is, but it's about matching these attributes to the subject matter in a way that is particularly satisfying. Again, that doesn't really satisfy as an answer. I mean, another way to look at it is, if you are writing a novel, you are expanding all the time, you are enlarging, you are allowing your characters to spread out and do their thing, to do their worst before you have to kind of direct them back through the fence at the far end of the forest in order to have a satisfying ending for your reader. Otherwise, there'll be lots of loose ends if you don't get them all through that gate at the end. And with a short story, you mentioned the difference between novel and the short story. With a short story, you're doing the opposite. You are condensing, you are distilling all the time. And I guess with the novella, you are doing both of these things at the same time. So it's a difficult trick to pull off, perhaps, but it's always worth a go. And if you do get somewhere close to the ideal, it's a particularly satisfying read. I mean, as a reader, I find that, and we've talked before about how we feel that they do it better on the continent, continental Europe, than in the UK, or perhaps in the United States and Canada as well. And I agree with that. It's just something about enough is enough and never too much kind of thing. And the French in particular are very good at that. So yeah, I have a very fond spot for the novella. I mean, as a writer, it's nice to work with, because you get to paint a whole world, but without spending 500 words or something doing it. So a lot of discipline required. And as a reader, it's really satisfying, because you get all this meaning, if you like, you get all this meaning that you would get in a novel, but you don't have to spend a week actually doing it. You could do it in a single sitting if you want, which is really nice, given that everyone has such a short attention span these days. And the idea of reading Madame Bovary or Middlemarch or something, nobody would get past the first page nowadays. So yeah, the novella is a beautiful thing. Thank you for asking.
You're most welcome. And also, I'd like to ask William about the 1970s, 80s Hammer horror tone to the work that you're developing, because I think that's particularly interesting, that you have, kind of literary works, kind of gay horror fiction, but it nods and touches on the tradition of Hammer horror films, British horror, and that sort of time period, late 70s, 80s, and how you feel about that, why you feel what you feel about that.
Oh, well, I've always been a great lover of horror. I think I always used to feel very very denied because obviously the age restrictions around horror. So, you know, you couldn't go and see a film until you were 18 at the cinema. And when I was young, we didn't have all these wonderful things like DVDs and streaming and all of that thing. So if the film was on at the cinema and you weren't old enough to go and see it, then it was gone and you had to wait 5 years before it would come on the television. So I was always a huge fan of you know, horror, and it was so mysterious. And I remember talking to Caroline Munro, who's an actress, a British actress who was in Hammer horror films, and she wrote the introduction to my collection of short stories, Shapes in the Dark. And she said she had the same feeling as a child, that she always wanted to see these horror films because they were naughty, because they were forbidden. You know, you wanted to see what it was like. So I've always been a huge fan of that. And my parents were quite moralistic about sex, but not very moralistic about watching horror films and things. So I used to, I was allowed to watch certain horror films, when video recorders first came out, I think it was about 1978. My dad was a bit of a working class boy made good, and he sort of, you know, was a bit of a self-made man. So we always had the latest gadgets. So we had a video recorder, and I used to videotape horror films that were on Saturday night on BBC TV, and then watch them on Sunday morning. And so a lot of these films at the time were Hammer horror films. So I was a huge fan of all of the Hammer horror films and that genre. But the thing about them is, of course, they're marvelously camp, but they're very heteronormative. You know, there's lots of plunging necklines and bosoms, and, you know, women being bitten on the neck by Christopher Lee and all of those kind of fabulous 70s things. So when I started writing horror fiction, I was influenced by those ideas of Hammer horror, and to have that tone in the books, but to make the characters, you know, the victims and the heroes and the heroines of the stories not heteronormative, make them gay or lesbian, or, you know, LGBT plus. So that's really where all that comes from.
Thanks for that. I enjoyed that description, especially the plunging necklines.
Well, unless... Oh, no,
Sorry,
go ahead,
sorry,
Martin.
Greg. No, go.
I was just going to wrap things up unless you had anything else to say, or unless Barry or William had anything else to say.
Just to say thank you for hosting us. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Of course, yeah. And let us know if you ever make it across the pond to New York. Come say hi. We'd love to meet you.
Definitely, I'd love to do that. And as for the name being too long, it's not long enough.
Thank you. Yeah, some people thought we were crazy, but we felt like it was a fun and provocative title, something to get people thinking a bit. We were afraid if we just called it Gay Bookshop, everyone would think, oh, that's cute. It's going to close next week. So we decided for the mysterious government agency instead.
Yeah, it's got that nice municipal flavor that we like, you know. And I love the open brackets, closed brackets, really nice.
I also love when I'm on Facebook and like saying where the event location will be. I type in bureau, and the first thing that comes up besides our name is the FBI.
Exactly.
And after all, the FBI was started by and run by a queer man for years. Not a hero by any stretch of the imagination,
No.
but definitely queer nonetheless. Great.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Greg.
It was a pleasure. And like I said, yeah, hopefully we'll see you in New York someday, or maybe I myself will cross the pond and make it to the UK.
Either way, it'll be a pleasure.
Very
Excellent.
good. Okay, thanks
Right.
everyone. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Thanks for sharing your work with us.
Bye.
Bye.